Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Nandita Haksar, the well-known human rights activist, and we'll discuss the issues that have come up with Rohingyas over the last few years. Nandita, Rohingya issue has now become even worse. There are lots of people who are leaving, finding it very difficult to escape. Refugees have been taken away in leaky boats, and bodies have been dumped. A whole lot of set of issues. So, what is the condition right now? Both in Arakan, where it all starts from, and in the rest of the neighbouring countries, Bangladesh, Thailand has now seen some instances, and even some of the Asian, it's also people coming into India. So what is the status, and what do you think are the issues involved?
Well, one immediate issue is of course a humanitarian crisis in which a whole lot of people have been described as the most persecuted minority in the world, and it is a right kind of description. And these are people who have been persecuted for over many years, many decades, let us say. So this has reached a sort of a point when they just need to get out of that, out of their home, or what was their home, and they are just escaping and making very dangerous journeys across the seas and trying to get to Malaysia or Bangladesh. And Malaysia had at one time actually taken them in, and now they are getting so many people, and it's a crisis in which even Asian countries, and these are poor countries, I mean after all these are third world countries, who can't take the burden of so many refugees. So it is a massive humanitarian crisis, and these Rohingyas are, a victim of all kinds of things. It's persecution, religious persecution, it is a poverty, and international politics. So immediately, of course, that is the major concern.
The Burmese government seems to not recognize them as Burmese at all. They have been designated as Bangladeshis, and they are really not Bangladeshis, or if they were a few generations back. So doesn't this raise questions about how you recognize ethnic minorities in these countries?
Well, absolutely. Actually, again, let's go back to the issue of their statelessness and how they lost their citizenship. In the if I'm not mistaken, it was 1974 Constitution of Burma, Myanmar, which is now Myanmar, which they lost their citizenship. And then there was a 1982 Act, under which a whole lot of people lost their citizenship, including 25 lakh Indians. Now, so I want to say one thing, that it was not only a Buddhist Muslim issue, it was also a issue of others. And there has been actually silence in India about the fate of these 25 lakh Indians. They were Indians in the sense that they were Indians in 47. So some of them may now be looked at Bangladeshis, but they were from the Indian subcontinent, and they were living in a place near Zyavadi, which is where Subhash Chandra Bose took shelter. So this was an area where they were, and I have recorded that. I went to Burma, I went to Myanmar 3 years ago, and there I found there were horrific stories. They couldn't cross over, they didn't have travel documents. Now the Rohingyas lost their citizenship, they had other disabilities. They couldn't buy land, couldn't take jobs, they lost their jobs, they lost their livelihood, and they lost every inch of any basic security of what a citizen or any human being is entitled to. So this was a kind of situation, and they have been fighting it. But I think we have to go a little more deeper, so that we understand the complexity of the problem.
So when you talk about the complexity of the problem and going back to history, you're really talking about the role of some of the groups within the Rohingyas who had a political agenda, separating from Burma, trying to form an independent state and so on. Is that what we are
partly,
talking about?
But why should we try and understand this? Let's see why a person like Aung San Suu Kyi, which is like an icon of democracy, why is it she's not condemning the violence against the Rohingyas? I think it's a question which should trouble us. and we should find out why she's not doing it, see the compulsions. Of course, everyone either condemns her or says, why is she not doing it? And we're not understanding it. By understanding doesn't mean justification. It doesn't even mean rationalization. But it does mean a political understanding of the situation. Now, in fact, Rohingyas, it is not even recently, from 1947 to 61, they had a movement, Islamic militancy, in which they were taking up the cause that they wanted to unite their part of Rakhine state, which is Arakan state, which is now again called Rakhine state, should be united with East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. Now, that was a demand which they had made from 1947 to 61.
In fact, they had approached Jinnah earlier for joining
Yes.
Pakistan.
So that was, and the other side was the Chakmas, who wanted to not be in Myanmar, they wanted to be part of India. So these were problems born out of the colonial era and state reorganizations and boundary reorganizations, because people were, because of religion and nationality and other issues. But at this time, these Rohingyas were largely in the Arakan state, which is now, as I said, renamed in 1989 perhaps as Rakhine state. Now, the Arakan, the majority population there is Buddhist, and they're very proudly Buddhist for many years, and they were the people who were the custodians of the Mahamuni image, which was from the time of Buddha, according to them. And the Arakans have in their discourse or their understanding a kingdom which had been independent for 5,000 years, and it was never conquered till the British came, and then the Burmese came. So there's this history, and in that history the Muslims were very much there. There were Muslim scholars, there were Muslim traders, and there was, for instance, Aurangzeb's brother took shelter with the Arakans. So at that time, historically there was no tension between the Buddhist Arakans and the Muslim Rohingyas. There was no history of such a tension. So we have to see why this tension suddenly happens at the time of independence of Burma, India, Pakistan. Part of it is a Cold War situation in which the primary focus of the British and the West was to fight communism, and communists were very strong. That was, China had just become communist, the Burmese Communist Party was very strong, and the Arakans were working also, a part of them were working with the Burmese Communist Party. Now here the Rohingyas were used or allowed themselves to be used, or whatever you may say, against the Arakans. So there's a history during the Cold War.
This is also the 42 massacres that took place on both sides,
Yes.
in which Rohingyas were probably the major, started the attacks
yes.
on the Buddhists.
So there is that history, and even if the world forgets it, the people living there don't forget it. After all, it's just a generation, so they remember this. So the Arakans have the memory of this background. Then the Rohingyas, then 47 itself, or 48, when General Aung San was murdered or assassinated. Now at that time, General Aung San really had a vision, a truly democratic vision of a union of Burma, in which all the minority nationalities and the minority Muslims within each minority nationality were part of nation building process. He started what was called a Panglong process, which is dialogues with the ethnic minorities. And some people say that the reason for his assassination, or the people behind his assassination, was to stop that Panglong process. And after that, UNU became the first Prime Minister of Burma, and he declared Buddhism as the state religion. And it is at that time that we see the first Burmese Muslim organization come into. Then in 82, again when their citizenship is taken, we again see a Burmese Muslim organization emerge. And then you see the Muslims of the Karens, the Muslims within Arakan, Muslims of these various nationalities coming together and forming their union. So there's this other process that comes. And then as a reaction to their lack of citizenship, the Rohingyas organize. And when they organize and they ask for their own homeland, or they want their own, first there's autonomy and then there's a homeland and then there's this whole history. So it is much far more complicated. And then there is, as in the northeast, there is the Bangladesh migrants, and there are Bangladeshis coming in just as they're coming into the northeast, whatever the reasons. So there is a threat that the Arakan identity and ethnic identities are under a threat. So these are very complex factors that are working.
Which is actually the problem of colonialism in that sense.
Yes.
And most of the states came out as a part of anti-colonial struggles. And otherwise, it was not that they had an identity before that as a unified identity.
No. So therefore, now the question is that how do you again have a polity which includes all these people? And these slogans like inclusive politics, I think, is not really enough. There has to be a vision. And that vision, I think, is what is lacking. So a person like Aung San Suu Kyi, who talks about democracy, still has no alternative to offer of how to unite all. I mean, there is now another process which is going on in Myanmar, another kind of second Panglong process, ethnic nationalities union. But this idea of nationality versus religion, it's the major issue today all over the world. And that is the core and root of the Rohingya problem.
A really difficult question. What do you think the world should do? What do you think Burma should do? Myanmar should do?
Myanmar, I think they had an Aung San who had a vision. But I don't think you can go back in history. And today, for so many reasons, if we look at what is happening in Myanmar, you know, there is the army. And the army is not a product of colonial rule. The Myanmar army is a product of national movement. It was set up by the Japanese. It was not set up by the British. So they are very strongly nationalist. So there is this continuous thread throughout the Myanmar history about not allowing foreign aggression, not allowing the country to break up. But it hasn't worked, or it has worked. I mean, I do not know in which way you would look at it. But if it worked during Nevin's time, it became the poorest country in the world.
Thank you very much, Nandita. We'll discuss this issue and other issues with you as they unfold. Thank you very much.